4:18 a.m., Port of Oakland. Berth 7. 41 federal agents moved through the pre-dawn dark in 3 columns across a 4.2-acre concrete yard. No warning shots, no loudspeakers, just boots on asphalt, and the low mechanical hum of refrigeration units running somewhere deep inside the container rows. The target was 3 reefer containers in the back row, designated H7, H8, and H9 on the yard map. Stacked between columns of standard dry freight boxes, they looked identical to the 240 other refrigerated units on the lot. The containers were painted the same standard marine-grade steel blue. They bore the same manufacturer placard markings. Their external ventilation grates matched standard refrigeration equipment. Nothing about them, at visual distance, suggested they were anything other than temperature-controlled cargo storage. They were not identical. 19 minutes later, federal agents had breached all 3 containers, secured the yard, and called for medical transport. The call requested 17 ambulances. 17 women walked out of the Port of Oakland that morning under medical escort. Some had been inside those containers for 139 days. All of them had been reported missing. All of them were alive. What triggered that raid wasn't a tip from a witness, an informant, a photo, or a phone call. It was a number on a piece of paper, a weight listed on a cargo manifest that was 3,460 pounds heavier than it should have been. 1 junior customs broker. 1 discrepancy. 17 women recovered. Federal investigators spent the next 3 months answering a complicated question. Not just how 17 women ended up inside a bonded cargo yard at the Port of Oakland, but how a licensed, Treasury-approved logistics facility had operated as a staging node for a foreign-linked network for over 14 months. How it processed thousands of containers, received routine federal inspections, paid its fees on time, and went completely undetected. The answer starts with Pacific Translogistics LLC and how the bonded warehouse system actually works. A bonded warehouse is a federally licensed facility where imported goods can be stored before customs duties are paid. The goods sit in legal limbo, on U.S. soil but not yet cleared for domestic commerce. Operators must obtain Treasury Department approval, maintain detailed manifests, and submit to Customs and Border Protection oversight. It's one of the most regulated storage arrangements in U.S. trade law. Pacific Translogistics held its bonded warehouse license since spring of 2019. In those 6 years, the company processed an average of 1,800 containers per quarter. CBP had never issued a single penalty against the facility. Its paperwork was consistently clean. Its fees were paid on time. Its principals cooperated with routine inspections without incident. On paper, Pacific Translogistics was one of the most compliant mid-tier bonded operators at the Port of Oakland. Federal investigators now allege that was precisely the point. The 3 principals were David Marsh, a 44-year-old Oakland-born logistics consultant, Roland Ferris, a 51-year-old naturalized U.S. citizen with 15 years in freight brokerage, and Arash Tehrani, a 48-year-old Tehran-born permanent resident who held the senior operations role and served as the primary liaison to overseas shipping partners. All 3 had professional histories that gave them legitimate standing in the maritime freight industry. None had prior federal charges. Marsh had spent the early part of his career working freight forwarding contracts for a major Bay Area import distributor, before establishing himself as an independent logistics consultant in 2014. Ferris had worked for 3 different established freight brokerage firms before going independent, and held professional certifications from 2 industry trade organizations. Tehrani arrived in the United States in 2001, earned a degree in supply chain management, and built a client network spanning domestic and international freight routes over 2 decades. On paper, the 3 men were exactly what their company presented itself as: experienced, credentialed professionals in a technically complex industry. That background was the operation's first and most important layer of cover. Federal prosecutors allege that beginning in late summer of 2024, the 3 men entered into an arrangement with a logistics chain, linked to a network operating out of Tehran and functioning through intermediary shell companies registered in the UAE, Turkey, and Cyprus. The arrangement had two operational layers. The first involved moving sanctioned dual-use components, specifically drone navigation hardware, through the bonded yard under falsified bills of lading that declared the contents as standard electronics. The bonded status meant the goods could sit in legal holding without triggering the level of customs examination applied to goods cleared for domestic sale. The second layer was different in kind. The court documents use careful language. They described the reefer containers as modified for extended human occupancy. Ventilation hatches cut into the rear panels, basic temperature regulation adjusted to habitable range, a daily food delivery protocol that used a single vent hatch at the rear of each unit. The three containers in the back row were isolated from the main traffic flow by a deliberate arrangement of dry freight containers stacked three high on either side, creating a corridor not visible from the yard office or from the main CBP inspection lane. The 17 women inside had been recruited through a false front. Court documents describe a fictitious medical staffing company that advertised contracted clinical positions across Northern California and Nevada beginning in October of 2025. The positions paid above market rates. They required relocation to a temporary housing site for an initial orientation period. Women who responded were told transportation would be arranged. Transportation was arranged. It did not go where they were told. The women ranged in age from 22 to 41. They had been reported missing from Sacramento, Fresno, Stockton, Reno, and 4 smaller Bay Area communities. They were reported by family members, roommates, employers. Law enforcement in each jurisdiction opened missing persons cases. None of those cases initially connected to a single network. The women were treated as separate incidents across separate jurisdictions. They were not. One detail stands out. Reading the missing persons timeline in the case file, the recruitment advertisements, and the first reported disappearances track almost exactly. October 2025. The ads go up. November 2025. The first 3 women disappear within 8 days of each other. By January 2026, the number is 11. By early February, it is 17. The operation ran with a quiet, administrative regularity that makes it harder to detect, not easier. Here's what this tells us about what federal investigators were dealing with. Because each disappearance was filed in a different jurisdiction, and because none of the women knew each other beforehand, the pattern couldn't be seen at the county or state level. It required a federal lens to make the shape visible. And that lens wasn't applied to the missing persons cases. It was applied to a cargo manifest. The break came from a routine process that had nothing to do with the missing women. April 4th. A junior customs broker, named in federal documents only by his CBP employee designation, Broker Agent T. Reyes, was processing routine manifest review for the Pacific Transyard. Reyes wasn't conducting a targeted audit. He was clearing a backlog of standard paperwork. One manifest entry listed container number PTLK7447 as containing textile goods, synthetic fabric rolls, declared weight 11,400 pounds. The CBP weigh station scan from 2 days prior recorded the container's actual weight as 14,860 pounds, a difference of 3,460 pounds. Textile shipments fluctuate in declared weight, moisture content, packaging variance, loading inconsistency. A difference of a few hundred pounds is unremarkable. A difference of 3,400 pounds is not a textile variance. That's the weight of a compact SUV. Reyes filed an anomaly report. Standard procedure. The report went to his supervisor, then was escalated within 48 hours to Homeland Security Investigations, Oakland Field Office. HSI Oakland assigned the anomaly to a 2-agent review team. Within 72 hours, they had pulled the full manifest history for Pacific Trans Logistics going back 18 months. The weight discrepancy on container PTLK 447 was not an isolated entry. Over the previous 14 months, 7 Pacific Trans manifests showed declared weights that did not match weigh station records. The average discrepancy was 2,900 pounds. In every case, the containers were listed as textile or electronic shipments. In every case, the containers were assigned to the back row of the yard, the same row with restricted sight lines from the main inspection lane. 7 containers, 7 weight mismatches, a pattern that should have appeared in routine audit cycles. It had not. And here is why that matters. Pacific Translogistics submitted to scheduled CBP inspections on a quarterly cycle. Every scheduled inspection, the company's paperwork was clean. What the inspectors checked against were the manifests Pacific Trans submitted. The manifests were falsified. Clean paperwork, cooperative principles, and 6 years of compliance history meant no flags during scheduled review. The most surprising part of this case isn't the sophistication of the concealment. It's how ordinary the vulnerability was. One weight check, one honest anomaly report from a mid-level broker clearing a backlog. That's the gap the entire operation fit through for 14 months. Before the surveillance window opened, HSI Oakland conducted a quiet background review of the 3 principals over a 72-hour period. Agents pulled business registration records, financial disclosures, travel histories, and communication metadata available under existing legal authorities. What emerged was a financial picture inconsistent with a mid-tier logistics operation. Tehran's personal accounts showed incoming wire transfers from a Cyprus-registered financial services company totaling approximately $480,000 over the preceding 16 months. The transfers were categorized in the wire descriptions as consulting service fees. Ferris had made 6 international wire transfers to a UAE account during the same period. Marsh showed no anomalous financial activity in his personal accounts. That became a point of investigative interest in itself. The absence of a visible financial trail for one of 3 principals in an alleged criminal arrangement isn't proof of non-involvement. It might just mean a more sophisticated payment method. The background review also surfaced something about Tehran's travel history. He had made 4 trips to Istanbul in the preceding 20 months, each between 4 and 6 days in duration, each time to within 2 weeks of a new container shipment arriving at the Pacific Trans Yard. Investigators noted the pattern, but couldn't confirm its significance from open records alone. It became one of the threads that the surveillance window was designed to develop further. HSI Oakland opened a covert surveillance window on April 7th. The operation was designated under an internal case reference and authorized for 90 days. The surveillance package included infrared monitoring mounted on 2 CBP inspection vehicles, repositioned to give sightline coverage of the back row, acoustic sensors placed under federal warrant on the exterior panels of 3 flagged containers, and round-the-clock human surveillance from 2 vantage points outside the yard perimeter. The infrared returns came back on the first night. 3 containers in the back row were generating thermal signatures inconsistent with refrigerated cargo. Refrigerated containers produce a characteristic thermal pattern, consistent cold surface radiation from the walls, minimal internal variation. The signatures on H7, H8, and H9 showed warm spots. Multiple warm spots, the kind of thermal variation that occurs when living bodies are present in an enclosed refrigerated space. On April 9th, 2 days into surveillance, acoustic monitoring registered sounds from inside container H7. The case file describes the sounds as consistent with human occupancy. That confirmation changed the operational calculus immediately. HSI Oakland convened a command-level meeting on April 10th. The question on the table wasn't whether there were people inside the containers. The infrared and acoustic returns made that effectively certain. The question was how to proceed without triggering an early exit by the principals and without putting the people inside at greater risk during an uncontrolled response. Put yourself in the position of the lead HSI supervisor at that meeting for a moment. You have confirmed human presence in 3 modified shipping containers. You don't yet know how many people. You don't know their condition. You don't know whether the principals have a warning protocol that would cause them to move the containers, or worse, before you can execute a controlled entry. You have 2 options. Move immediately with what you have, or hold the surveillance window and build a complete operational picture first. Either option carries consequences you can't fully predict. The decision was to hold. Run the surveillance window, build the picture, document the daily delivery protocol, map every person who accessed the back row, identify the full network before a tactical entry collapsed the case into 3 defendants with incomplete charges. That decision meant the women inside stayed inside for another 2 months and 12 days. There is a line in the case file that reads almost like a procedural footnote, but it carries the weight of the entire operation. Continued surveillance to identify full network participants and corroborate elements of underlying sanctions evasion predicate. That sentence is the calculus. Complete prosecution versus immediate rescue. The tension between them is not resolved cleanly in the record, and it should not be resolved cleanly here. Here's the take that will draw disagreement. The 90-day surveillance window was the legally correct call and the tactically rational call. It was also a call made by people who were not inside those containers. The women recovered on June 22nd had been there for 139 days. Without the surveillance delay, the number would have been 89. The additional 50 days represent a choice that will be debated in this case long after the convictions are final. Whether that choice was the right one is something reasonable people will not agree on. On April 14th, 1 week into the surveillance window, HSI investigators ran the names and physical descriptions from the 17 open missing persons cases against the thermal signature count from the infrared returns. The infrared data suggested between 15 and 19 warm signatures distributed across the 3 containers. The missing persons count at that point was 14 active cases across the 4 county and 2 state filing jurisdictions. The number was not a match. It was close enough to be significant. Investigators formally linked the missing persons cases to the Pacific Trans surveillance operation on April 16th. The families of the missing women were not notified. The investigation was sealed. That decision, the decision not to tell the families that their relatives had likely been located, is another element of this case that the public record does not resolve comfortably. Investigators have stated that notification risked compromise of the surveillance operation. The families had no knowledge of that reasoning at the time. 2 weeks into the surveillance window, agents documented the daily delivery protocol in detail for the first time. The individual making the deliveries arrived in a white panel van with a magnetic signage panel on the driver's door displaying a fictitious refrigeration maintenance company name. The van entered the yard through the secondary access gate, which required a key card. The delivery individual, described in case documents only as an adult male, used the same key card each morning. He transferred items from the van to a wheeled aluminum cart, moved the cart along the corridor between the stacked dry freight containers to the rear of each reefer unit, and passed packages through the rear vent hatch of each container in sequence. The entire process from gate entry to gate exit averaged 11 minutes. He made no contact with the yard office. He spoke to no one. Agents ran the van's license plate on April 22nd. The plate came back registered to a leasing company in Hayward. The lease was held by a Shell LLC, with no other commercial activity visible in state records. The individual operating the van was identified through a combination of surveillance photography and DMV records as a 31-year-old Alameda County resident with no prior federal record. He was not arrested during the surveillance window. His identity was logged and monitored. As of the public filing date of the indictment, he had not been charged. A serious obstacle emerged in the 5th week of surveillance. On May 12th, one of the acoustic monitoring sensors on container H8 developed a fault circuit failure, consistent with prolonged exposure to the container's external condensation cycle. The data stream from H8 went dark. Technicians could not replace the sensor without risking detection during the daily delivery window. For 11 days, surveillance had full acoustic coverage of 2 containers and none on the 3rd. The technical team resolved it on May 23rd by mounting a secondary acoustic array on a forklift unit that was authorized to operate in the back row as part of routine yard maintenance. The forklift was operated by an undercover HSI asset already placed inside the yard on a contracted day labor arrangement. Coverage was restored. The asset's access also confirmed the delivery protocol. A single individual accessed the back row each morning between 6:45 and 7:15 a.m., moving a wheeled cart to each of the 3 containers and passing items through a rear vent hatch. The asset documented this on 9 consecutive mornings. On the same day the acoustic coverage was restored, May 23rd, investigators noted a change in the thermal signature pattern from container H8. The number of warm signatures had decreased by 1 compared to the baseline established in the first week of monitoring. The change was flagged internally and recorded in the case file. The case file does not contain a subsequent entry explaining the discrepancy. It is one of the details in the public record that does not have a visible resolution. Investigators have not publicly addressed it. By late May, HSI Oakland had also established the second operational layer, a review of Pacific Trans shipping records, cross-referenced with CBP entry databases and Treasury's OFAC-designated entity lists, identified 3 shipments over the previous 14 months that contained components matching the description of sanctioned dual-use drone navigation hardware. The components had been declared under generic electronics categories, with falsified bills of lading listing a Turkish electronics distributor as the manufacturer of origin. The actual origin, traced through hull markings and component serial prefixes matched to OFAC watch lists, was Iranian-linked manufacturing facilities subject to U.S. sanctions. 96 gyroscopes. Drone navigation components. Component class categorized under U.S. export control regulations as dual-use items with direct military application. Moving them through a bonded U.S. facility under false documentation was a federal sanctions evasion offense. It also added a national security dimension to what had begun as a cargo weight anomaly. What's most surprising about this case isn't the scale of it. It's that the national security layer and the captivity layer were running simultaneously inside the same 4.2 acres, served by the same falsified paperwork system. The sanctions operation gave the network its infrastructure. The bonded license gave it its cover. The captivity operation was layered on top of existing logistics. Federal investigators believe the sanctions evasion scheme predated the captivity component by approximately 8 months. The yard was already operational and trusted before it was used for the second purpose. The network was bigger than 3 men in 1 yard. HSI Oakland, working with FBI counterterrorism and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of California, identified at minimum 3 additional nodes. A commercial property in Fremont used as a secondary document processing site. A financial services LLC in San Jose through which operating funds were routed. And an overseas coordination contact, identified only as a foreign national, believed to be operating from outside U.S. jurisdiction, who served as the primary link between the Tehran-connected supply chain and the U.S.-based operators. The overseas contact was not arrested on June 22nd. That loop is not closed. In the final week of May, federal investigators received authorization to conduct a covert physical search of the Fremont property under a sneak-and-peek warrant. 2 HSI agents and 1 FBI agent entered the property during a window when surveillance had confirmed all known occupants were elsewhere. What they found was a document operation, a commercial-grade scanner, 2 laptops running software associated with freight manifest generation, and a filing system containing blank pre-printed shipping document templates. The templates bore the letterhead of at least 4 different freight companies, none of which had been identified as affiliated with Pacific Trans in public records. The agents photographed and documented the contents. Nothing was removed. The warrant was a documentation-only entry. A full seizure warrant was prepared but held pending the June 22nd raid to prevent alerting the network that the Fremont node had been identified. The laptops were of particular interest. Investigators could not access their contents during the sneak-and-peek entry without risking detection. Logging into an encrypted device leaves traces. What the agents observed was that both laptops were active, displaying open document windows, which meant someone had been using them recently and had not closed the sessions before leaving. The content visible on screen was not described in detail in the public case file. The agents documented what they could observe without touching the devices. The full contents of those laptops became a significant evidentiary target for the June 22nd evidence collection. By early June, HSI Oakland had enough to execute. The case file had been reviewed by the U.S. Attorney's Office. The warrant package was approved on June 16th. Tactical planning for the entry operation was assigned to a joint team, HSI Oakland, CBP Tactical Unit, and FBI Hostage Rescue Team, which was brought in specifically because the operation involved confirmed live subjects in a confined space environment. HRT's involvement changed the entry planning. A standard HSI tactical entry on a commercial facility focuses on securing the perimeter, controlling principals, and preserving evidence. An entry into a modified shipping container with confirmed human occupancy requires a different sequence. You breach after confirming the container is not rigged for any internal response. You enter with medical personnel staged at the container mouth. You don't know the physical condition of the people inside until the door opens. You plan for every condition. FBI HART ran 2 full rehearsals on June 18th and June 20th, using container units at a federal training facility. The rehearsals mapped the internal layout of modified reefer containers, based on infrared and acoustic data collected over the surveillance window. Agents practiced the entry sequence for all 3 containers simultaneously. 19 minutes was the target extraction time. Simultaneous breach was required to prevent any response from one container being communicated to the others during the sequence. The entry was set for June 22nd at 4:18 a.m., chosen specifically for minimal port traffic, maximum darkness, and the window between the last daily delivery, the prior morning, and the next scheduled one. At approximately 10 p.m. on June 21st, Arash Tehrani's personal cell phone, under monitoring per warrant, received a call from an unidentified number using a voice-over IP routing service. The call lasted 47 seconds. The content was not clearly recorded due to signal encryption, but the pattern of the call, incoming, short duration, unusual hour, triggered a protocol review at HSI Oakland. The question was whether the June 22nd entry window had been compromised. Command made the decision at 11:40 p.m. The operation proceeds on schedule. If the window was compromised, delay would be worse than entry. Moving forward gave the team control of the timeline. Waiting handed control to the other side. June 22nd. 3:58 a.m. The joint tactical team staged on the access road outside the Pacific Transyard perimeter. 41 agents across 3 entry columns. Medical teams in 3 separate vehicles staged 200 meters back. A 4th vehicle carried the HRT containment unit. CBP Tactical had the yard entrance and the office building. HSI had the 3 principals' residential addresses simultaneously. Warrants executed at 4:18 a.m. across 3 separate locations in Alameda County. 4:18 a.m. entry commenced. The outer perimeter was secured in under 4 minutes. The yard office was empty. Marsh and Ferris were arrested at their respective residences at 4:19 a.m. and 4:22 a.m. Tehrani was taken at 4:23 a.m. The HRT columns reached the back row at 4:24 a.m. Containers H7, H8, and H9 breached simultaneously. The extraction sequence ran exactly as rehearsed. The first container held 6 women, the second held 7, the third held 4, 17 total, all alive, all transported under medical escort to Alameda County Medical Center and Highland Hospital beginning at 4:47 a.m. The clinical records referenced in the federal complaint described conditions consistent with prolonged confinement. Several women required immediate IV hydration. All received full medical evaluation. All were identified against the outstanding missing persons records maintained across 4 California and Nevada counties. Several had been inside the containers since November 2025, 139 days. The moment the container doors opened is described in the operational after-action record in brief, functional language. Agents announced federal law enforcement. Medical personnel moved to the container mouth. The report notes that the women inside did not immediately move toward the opening. Several remained against the far wall. The after-action language attributes this to the disorientation consistent with prolonged confinement and low-light conditions. What it does not describe, because after-action reports are not written to describe this, is what it looks like when someone who has been inside a steel box for months sees a door open in the dark before dawn and has to decide whether to move toward it. The medical teams at the container mouths were trained for that moment. Their protocol was to make visual contact, identify themselves calmly, and wait, not to move into the container until the occupants began to respond. The approach is standard for confined space rescue involving human subjects under duress. In the first container, approximately 90 seconds passed from breach to the first woman moving toward the door. In the third container, it took longer. As the extraction happened, HSI evidence teams moved through the Pacific Transyard office and on-site storage. They recovered 96 drone gyroscopes in sealed packaging inside a dry freight container adjacent to the main office building. They recovered a falsified bill of lading registry, a physical book containing what the complaint describes as pre-printed documentation templates and handwritten entry logs covering 14 months of falsified shipments. They recovered $312,000 in U.S. currency in sealed plastic packaging inside a wall-mounted safe in Tehrani's private office. The yard's bonded warehouse license was suspended by CBP at 8 a.m. on June 22nd. Pacific Translogistics LLC ceased operations the same morning. We spent time going through the indictment documents, and one detail keeps returning: the falsified bill of lading book. Court documents describe it as a physical, handwritten registry. In an operation that used encrypted communications, shell companies in 3 countries, and modified shipping infrastructure, the central document record was a handwritten book. Investigators believe this was deliberate. Digital records are traceable. A physical book in a locked office leaves no metadata trail. It was the most analog element of an otherwise sophisticated operation, and it was sitting in plain sight in a wall safe. David Marsh, Roland Ferris, and Arash Tehrani were each charged on June 22nd with federal hostage-taking under Title 18, Section 1241, sanctions evasion under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, conspiracy to export controlled defense articles in violation of the Arms Export Control Act, and conspiracy to commit document fraud. The hostage-taking charge carries a statutory maximum of life imprisonment. All 3 were ordered detained pending trial at an initial appearance on June 24th before a federal magistrate in the Northern District of California. Bail was denied. The U.S. Attorney for the Northern District described the operation in a press statement as, quote, the largest U.S. soil interdiction of an Iran-linked captivity operation on record, end quote. The statement did not name the overseas coordination contact. It did not address whether additional arrests were anticipated. It confirmed that the case remained an active federal investigation. The overseas contact remains unidentified in public filings. Here's the question. When a federal surveillance window extends an ongoing captivity to build a stronger prosecution case, is that the system working correctly or failing the people it was built to protect? It is not a simple question. It will be argued in this case, and it will be argued beyond it. Several threads did not close on June 22nd. The overseas coordination contact, the foreign national believed to be operating outside U.S. jurisdiction, has not been publicly identified. Federal investigators indicated in sealed proceedings that international coordination was ongoing, but no arrest or formal identification has been made public as of this date. The Fremont property and the San Jose Financial LLC were searched on June 22nd. Evidence was seized from both. No additional arrests were announced in connection with either site. Federal prosecutors have not publicly stated whether additional charges are being prepared for individuals connected to those nodes. The $312,000 recovered from the yard was seized under federal forfeiture procedures. The financial routing through the San Jose LLC, however, suggests a broader fund flow that the recovered currency does not account for. The full financial picture, how much money moved through the network over 14 months, where it went, and whether any portion of it remains accessible to parties not yet charged, is not part of the public record. And there is a fourth thread that investigators have not publicly addressed. Of the 7 manifests showing weight discrepancies over 14 months, agents focused their covert attention on the 3 back row containers confirmed to hold human occupants. The remaining 4 discrepancy entries involved containers that had already been cleared and moved before surveillance commenced. What was in those 4 containers, whether they carried sanctioned components or something else, or whether the discrepancies reflected earlier phases of the same captivity operation, has not been disclosed. The women recovered on June 22nd have been reunited with their families. Their medical treatment is ongoing. Their names have not been released. Their cases are referenced in federal filings only by initials. The families in Sacramento, Fresno, Stockton, Reno, and 4 Bay Area communities who filed missing persons reports beginning in November 2025 spent between 2 and 5 months with no information about where their family members were. Some of those reports sat in county databases without connection to a federal case for the entirety of the surveillance window. Some families hired private investigators. Some held press conferences. One family's public appeal, a mother speaking at a Stockton City Council meeting in January 2026, asking for additional county resources on her daughter's missing persons case, was covered by a regional news outlet. Investigators monitoring the case were aware of the coverage. The sealed federal investigation precluded any response to the family's public appeal. Whether the family was ever informed of that fact is not documented in the public case file. The operational machinery that kept Pacific Trans Logistics licensed, inspected, and compliant-looking for 6 years is not unique to this facility. The bonded warehouse system processes tens of thousands of containers across dozens of U.S. ports each week. Weight discrepancies are logged routinely. Whether they are reviewed routinely is a different question. T. Reyes reviewed his because he was clearing a backlog. The anomaly report he filed was the first time a weight discrepancy on a Pacific Trans container had been escalated in 14 months of operations. 1 anomaly report, 3 defendants in federal custody, an overseas contact who has not been found, 96 sanctioned gyroscopes, a handwritten book in a wall safe, and 17 women who walked out of a concrete yard at the Port of Oakland before 5 a.m. on June 22nd into an overcast Bay Area morning, medical personnel on either side, and into the first natural light they had seen since before the winter. The network that held them has been dismantled, in part. The network of procedures, incentives, and institutional gaps that made the facility invisible for 14 months is still the framework inside which every bonded warehouse in the United States operates today. That framework has not changed. The next anomaly report is sitting in someone's queue right now.